Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 240 of our regular shows, and we're recording this on April 16th, 2022. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbender.online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, in terms of today's show, again, we've got a little bit of a special show here because we're obviously going to be covering news, but we have sort of a bit of a special topic this time out because just earlier this week we had the 10-year anniversary of Legend of Korra. So, shortly following the 10-year anniversary of the podcast, we have the anniversary of Korra itself. So, we're going to be having a little bit of a conversation about that. But mainly we'll focus on that in terms of we're actually going to be re-reviewing the first two episodes of Korra, which were the episodes that aired that day 10 years ago. So that should be pretty fun. But we'll hop into the news first to catch everyone up. So the first one I think is actually probably the most interesting one, and that is that some new Avatar figures have just been sort of revealed. It's a bit of a weird one here in that as far as I'm aware, only one place has these up, and I don't think the pictures listings for these are anywhere else. But IGN Store have listings for a Katara and a Zuko figure from Dark Horse Comics. So the Katara is scheduled to be coming out in October, the Zuko in December. These are 6 to 6.5 inch tall figures, and they're pretty nice. They look to be going for the very screen accurate style, and the sort of unique thing about them is that they're all on these sort of like sand kind of color texture bases that have the element symbol for each bender. So obviously for Katara it's water, for Zuko it's fire. They are both $60 and I already said what the dates are. So we don't know too much about these other than I think the person who told me about these listings did contact Dark Horse, and they said that these are not Dark Horse Direct items. They are just normal Dark Horse comic releases. So they will be available at multiple stores. This, I guess, is just an early listing of them. But Greg, what are your thoughts on these two new statues from Dark Horse getting back into statues again for Avatar?
Yeah, no, I think they're very good. I mean, I think, like you said, they are very, I guess, screen accurate, I guess is the term to use for these. But yeah, no, I think both of these are done really well. I mean, I think, the poses that they have, the water effects they have are really good. I really like the Zuko one for some reason. That one stands out a little bit more to me. But yeah, no, they just went straight with these. I hope they do all the rest of them as well, because these are really, I don't know, these feel like probably one of the best ones that I can think of in recent times that have been out. And yeah, they're not a Dark Horse Direct, so the fact that there are other places, even though on the IGN store, of course, they're completely sold out, so you can't get them through here anymore. But when they do go up on other places, I'm sure that these will probably be a really hot one that people really want to try to get their hands on, just based off of their appearance alone. So yeah, no, these are really good.
Yeah, they sold out, but I'm assuming they just haven't gone up for pre-order yet. Because otherwise, like, it feels like a handful of people found this listing ahead of time. Because a lot of people were asking, wait, IGN have a store that sells collectibles? Like, since when, in a way? I know we talked about, I think, the Chibi figures from a while back. They were revealed on IGN store as well. But it still feels pretty new, and obviously nowhere else has them, so who knows. But I guess in the coming months these will become available, because again the Katara is out in October, so they need to get the pre-orders up for that. But yeah, I like both of them as well. I actually tend to prefer the Katara one just a little bit, but I think that might just be because like we don't get a ton of Katara merch, and this is only the like second book 3 Katara thing. But I think they're both very good, and if they do like at least an Aang and a Toph for the matching kind of bases, I think this is going to be a really nice set of 4. I like that they're going for just the more sort of they both look like screen accurate, but also the bending that they're doing also feels screen accurate as well. Whereas the Diamond Select figures are cool because the bases are really wild and crazy, but there may be sort of unrealistic kind of like bending attacks that they're doing. Whereas here it feels like, oh yeah, Katara would definitely do that. Zuko has basically done that attack before in the show. It's still a cool bending attack, but it's not crazy over the top. So, yeah. And I think with the Katara, they got the face right this time, not too kind of like round and kind of big like maybe some of the other ones. So definitely good on that. And not too expensive. Like, obviously 60 for a statue that's not like super big is a little much, but for the quality it looks to be, this seems pretty solid in that a lot of the previous Dark Horse statues were more like 100 or just under 100. So this actually seems, I think, pretty good. So we have to wait and see what's going on with regards to like how accurate this information is when it goes up on other places. But so far so good on these, and a lot of people seem to like the look of them. So that's that. Next up, another update on the Yang Chen novel. This time on the exclusive edition, which is not the Barnes and Noble like limited edition or whatever it's called. This seems to just be an exclusive edition that seemingly, I guess, any retailer can get if they want. The listing on Edelweiss is like for a 12 copy floor display. Like, they don't have the exclusive listed separately, just on its own compared to the normal book. It's just, there's the standard book and then there's this 12 copy floor display exclusive edition. They now have pictures up of what the display looks like, and it looks pretty cool. What's exclusive about this is that it has a different kind of like dust cover, basically. That is a poster, I guess, on one side, and then on the other side it's more of the sort of like graphics cover of the book to get the information across. It's kind of cool because obviously it shows us like the back cover, I guess, the back cover art as well, which I guess maybe is our first like vague look at like Bin from the description, because it kind of looks Earth Kingdom-y, maybe mountains, maybe Earth, like Air Temple mountains, but I don't think it's too representative. It is weird though that it has the like the sort of element colors, and I think people have confirmed that they do say like Earth, Air, Fire, but I think some people were saying there's maybe something weird about them. It is weird that the water one is sort of like off to its own on like the spine of the book, and then the other three are separate. What do you make of the poster that there is here when it's all sort of stretched out?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know, the idea that they have set up with the elements, if that's what they're trying to represent, it does seem pretty odd. I mean, overall, I mean, it's the cover and it's sort of the back and it's sort of stretched out. So, I like the idea behind it and how it flows all across. So I think, if this is something that, we can just get or whatever, I think it's definitely going to be something that people want to get. But it is a bit curious about how it's actually sort of laid out in its current form here. I wonder if this is like final of it, or if this is sort of like temp final that they're putting up on their listing here. I'm not sure how I guess per when that date of it comes out is actually going to be official, but it definitely looks cool. Like the art, similar style as what we've seen before, so it works well with what we've seen with the book so far. So it definitely looks nice.
Yeah, and then if you look at the first image, it does say they have a little kind of like leaflet with it, and it does say limited quantities, only available for order via floor display only. So I suppose that tells you that unless someone gets these to sell them online, it probably is an in-store only thing, maybe. Again, I guess it depends on if your bookstore sells online or not, and how exactly that works. It's not too crazy of like an exclusive in that ultimately I suppose you'll have most of the same image on the standard dust jacket. It just won't be sort of like clean art on one side or something like that. It's not the same as like obviously some people, like if you can't get the Barnes and Noble one, you're actually going to miss out on that art and the deleted scene and stuff like that. It's a little bit kind of odd, but I guess they're going all out. They always talk in the marketing for these books about how much they've sold. Like on the actual listing for the normal copy of the book, they now have this sort of like kind of banner kind of GIF thing that says like 250,000 copy first print run, The two first the two first books, the two Kyoshi books, they say like over 500,000 sold and all this stuff. So um,
Oh yeah, I see.
they're really getting across that like this is big, and the fact that they now have like two exclusive editions, I suppose, highlights that they're kind of going for it here. So that's quite exciting. Um, we'll see what exactly goes on, because obviously there's some weird stuff with regards to like, okay, this is the first book that technically is using Chronicles of the Avatar. How does this work with regards to like, I'm guessing the paperback versions of Kyoshi, when they eventually come out in like 2024, will say
Oh yeah.
Chronicles of the Avatar on it now, um, which is going to make the set feel a little bit weird in that like the Kyoshi books came out when it wasn't really Chronicles of the Avatar, but we'll see how that goes. Um, the other thing here with regards to books is just that again, Patterns in Time has been delayed. This is like
Mhm.
every single month since this book has been announced, it has received a delay. And I think this is delay 7 now. It's now coming out 13th of September 2022. So it's been delayed by another, like, basically full month here. Uh, and what was really unfortunate about this is that the delay happened like 2 days before the anniversary. So it just felt like, oh, this book was. If this had kept to its release date, we'd have this book already. But it's way off now, and who's to say this is even the final release date? Because like it keeps getting delayed. Um, if the previous version of this is to go by, it could end up being in 2023. Who knows? And I don't get why these books specifically seem to suffer so much with delays when there's so little new content in it. I really, really don't get it, because initially this did have marketing on it to tie in with the anniversary, but it doesn't seem to anymore. So they're
Hmm.
obviously worried
That's
it might
interesting.
not make the year. Um, we seem to talk about this every podcast. We come on and talk about a delay, but do you think this is just down to like printing, COVID, shipping issues, or is it something to do with the nature of the book, the franchise specifically? Because people keep saying that like other Dark Horse books do not get delayed like Avatar books do.
Yeah, I mean, based on that, it definitely seems like it's a bigger piece of a puzzle that, we don't really have the full grasp of, which, makes sense. We're only looking at it from the outside. But I guess, in terms of just when they first announced it to now, without, like what you're saying, without knowing anything, it just seems really bad. And it doesn't seem like these are like, official, I guess, delay notices per se, like what we've gotten before sometimes. So it just seems even more disjointed, I guess, in that regard. So yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to think about this one anymore at this
Yeah.
point.
And that's the thing, like Team Avatar Tales got massive delays, like over a year worth of delays. I don't think it
Hmm.
was delayed as many times as this book has been, but it's getting close to it. But it was all pre-COVID. That book came out before COVID was ever even a thing, and it still had those issues. And so this has always been, I suppose, the problem with just like justifying everything with COVID, shipping, printing issues, is that these were going on. Like books were getting heavily delayed multiple times before this. This just seems to be like everything almost gets delayed. Um, so I suppose the only benefit here is that I don't think the Chibi comic has got delayed again. There's still time left in the month for that to happen, but it looks like it might be sticking to that date for now. But that book was meant to be out in like July last year, so um, it's not too much of a positive, obviously, especially when it's not really a book people are excited for. Um, so moving on to more positive things, the final release, pretty much, I guess, of the core book for the Avatar Legends role-playing game was released, and obviously typos got corrected. There were little, edits all over it, I suppose, for that sort of stuff. But the main new addition was that the chapter kind of starter pages, the first two pages, were blank previously. They now have full art, and we were all expecting basically nothing, maybe just some kind of fancy graphics that are kind of Avatar styled. But no, we got like 10 pretty large fancy images of characters. So These are very, very cool. So we have Kiyoshi, Roku, Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Zuko, Iroh, Korra, and Asami. Um, when this came out, people obviously were freaking out at these because they're in a really nice style, and they're quite big images as well, and they just make the characters look really, really cool. So people really liked a lot of these. I think the highlight ones were probably Korra and Asami actually were the ones people were freaking out about the most. The Roku was nice. Kyoshi obviously is super popular these days. Arguably, like I suppose Aang, Katara, Toph are probably the least interesting, but the Sokka one's actually really cool because it's him in his armor with the sword. But what are your thoughts on these? Which of these 10 images kind of stands out the most to you?
Yeah, no, these are all really, really good. Yeah, because I saw when people were talking about these, I was like, oh, these look really, really good. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I don't know, I like the Kyoshi one. I mean, some and Korra ones are really cool too as well. But I think probably Kyoshi stands out to me. I don't know, I like Roku's with the dragon in it as well. But yeah, no, they're all really good. The style definitely, it feels like it definitely adds character to, I guess, the book overall, which, it's a book, it's the rules of the game. So of course it's mostly just text. So it's really nice to see that they're, putting in the effort to, add these extra, art pages in here, considering, that's not necessarily the focus of the book, but it all helps in terms of like, visualizing it in your mind while you're playing the game, of course. So it's definitely worth it, I think, for sure.
hmm But yeah, really, really nice pieces of art. And again, like we've said about a lot of this stuff, it's so interesting to see how passionate the fandom is about just basically new official pieces of art. Even if it's just the sort of characters as we know them, it goes to show that, like, imagine these were like older versions of the characters. Like this was like the ATLA crew when they're older. Imagine it was like a first look at like Korra and Asami when they're older. Just stuff that's like actually like new. How much people would freak out. It gives you sort of a sense for like, when those Avatar Studios projects do come out, that if people are freaking out about like some images, imagine what they're going to be about like concept art for new projects. It's going to be pretty intense. But on the Avatar Legends role-playing game side of things, we also have the new update. So this is update 29, printing updates and FAQ. Basically, they just say that stuff is happening. They're beginning to prepare to send stuff to the printers. But the actual big reveal on this is that they're actually at least moving some of the printing or all of it to China. Because they have such a high volume that they can't get printers in the US that actually can deal with that amount. Other than that, it's just like, they're getting their print proofs ready. They say that all the accessories, so the physical items, are still in those same stages. They don't give any like previews or anything like that. They still say currently it's still on track for mid-year this summer, which I guess is the next couple of months. That seems a bit like, are they actually going to hit that or not? They have an FAQ about different things. I think they've more or less covered this stuff before. There's nothing particularly fancy there. I do notice the comments are actually going at them a bit over this. People not liking them moving it to China, which is interesting that they've generally had very positive reaction even when things have been going kind of bad. That this is the thing that is the kind of thing pushing people over the edge. But do you have any thoughts on this update here, the switch of printing to China?
I don't know. I mean, there's tons of reasons why people could be upset about that, but without getting into any specifics like that, I mean, I don't know. I guess it just shows, it's interesting just to show their volume and what they think they can do based off of the success of the Kickstarter campaign, because I'm sure if they didn't get the volume that they got because everyone really wanted to buy into it, they wouldn't have had to do that. So I mean, I guess it's a plus and a negative depending on how you're looking at it. I mean, I guess really at the end of the day, for the people who really want the physical items and all of that, it's really how efficient is this going to work in terms of, getting it into people's hands, and in addition to all the other materials, depending on what your actual pledge level was. So it's definitely interesting thing that they're trying to go for here. I mean, I hope it works out. I mean, that's really, the end of it is just being able to get the items, and how that actually goes about, and the quality of the items as well. So that'll be something we'll have to see when we hopefully do get the items.
Yeah, that's probably the big thing here. Is just like hope the quality is good. But that said, like a lot of like fancy books are printed in China. I don't think if being printed in China means it's going to be bad or anything like that. I think some of the Dark Horse books say they're printed in China, I think, if I remember correctly. So I don't really think that's like too much of an issue. Um, I do hope as they go on though that they do show what the stuff is going to look like before like we see it for the first time like arriving. Uh,
That might be nice. Some proofs.
yeah, like just so you can see like okay, this is what the Paisho tile looks like now. This is what the map thing looks like, and so on. But yeah, and especially like the fancy book with the like you know shiny stuff. Like how's that gonna be? Like people are expecting that to be incredible, so want to look at that. Because people will be frustrated if like they paid sort of extra for the fancy version and it's not as fancy as they expected it to be. But I suppose the last piece of news basically is Netflix Avatar show news. Uh, there's kind of a collection of casting news here that is there's a few actors that are now attached to the project, but we don't know who they're playing. Uh, there's casting calls for characters who have not yet been cast, so like Arnook, Paku, Yue. And then the big piece of news that kind of got people talking was that there's a casting call for Avatar Korra. Now, they go into the details of like it's actually the casting call, of course, doesn't use the name Korra, but it's clearly for Avatar, and it's like Dakota character, 30s to 40s, indigenous descent, legendary warrior from the past, appears as a spirit to deliver a warning to the tribe about the consequences of losing the coming battle. He has a soulful and melancholy demeanor, the result of losing the love of his life during a past war. Recurring guest performer, 2 episodes. So very clearly it's Karuk, slightly different, I suppose, than his role as we expect. And obviously this is one of the changes that I guess is happening with this version of the show, is that they're actually bringing Karuk into book one. He's alluded to in the show as we know it, in that we see Umi and Ko talks about, an incident with a previous avatar, and we learn later about it. I'm guessing they're basically just bringing up Escape from the Spirit World Karuk into this book, which makes sense. And it seems like, based on the fact that they've already cast like Kyoshi, they're going to probably lean more, I guess, into Aang will have more past Avatar interactions along the way. Whereas they actually didn't do that in book one. Like, we saw a statue of Kyoshi, we mentioned little bits and pieces, but we never actually like met her until like the following book. The same with Karuk. Like, he actually didn't get mentioned in the show, but they're actually seemingly getting across the idea that Karuk might actually speak to the Northern Water Tribe through Aang to warn them about what's happening, which is kind of interesting if there is a slightly bigger role for the character. But what are your thoughts overall on the recent kind of casting news for this, I suppose, focused on the Karuk stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting just to see, what we can glean from, these casting calls, or what people are understanding based off of how they're going to tweak and change and adapt the story for live action, which is, what they should do. So I'm really, I don't know, intrigued on seeing how they actually process all of this, and how well it actually works when we do see the final results. So I don't know. I mean, definitely shows that they're really putting forth, I guess, the thought in general towards it. I guess we'll just have to see how well it actually sort of pays off with the people that they're getting and everything else.
It is interesting though now that we've heard news about obviously Kyoshi, Karuk, but not Roku, who's actually like the important avatar in this book. So I wonder, are they just like holding that back, teasing that, or it'd be weird to skip him. I suppose like you could technically say that currently in the fandom, both Karuk and Kyoshi are more popular avatars than Roku, which is kind of interesting, but that is roughly, I suppose, how the fandom feels. But that would be a weird change, because I think you have to have that episode 8 scene in some way, because it's obviously a lot of the main cast coming together at the temple, the first big like Aang meeting a past Avatar scene. You kind of have to have that. So I don't know. Maybe it's just been kept a little bit more secret, or not. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we should be worried about Roku? He obviously was left out of the last Airbender movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't really. I don't know. I mean, I guess it really depends on how they're going to be adapting this story. I mean, I'm sure there's some way that they could leave him out, and it might actually work. But the fact that they're putting forth this effort to have, the other avatars in the story wouldn't lead me to believe that they're going to leave Roku out and completely or anything, or replace it with the dragon or something like that. So I don't know. I don't think I'm too worried on that. I mean, I don't. It is interesting that you say about sort of current I guess favoritism in the fandom of the past avatars as of this moment. I mean, I don't know. I wonder, and I'm sure you're more keyed into it than me, about Kuruk having more popularity because now we know sort of like the truth behind him. But I still feel like that's still a bit more of like a niche knowledge thing to know than like a wildly known thing. Because if you're really into it and you've read the books, or you've seen like your videos or other people's videos on the web or stuff, then like about that. Or if you're on social media, like if you look at any thread on IG where there'll be something about corrupt people, will be correcting you and being like, no, this is what actually happened in the books, you should read the books, etc., etc. So I feel like it is known that there's like more to him, but I don't know. I don't think he quite has that popularity yet until we see him in like a real, media animation or live action form. Then I'm sure, he might explode even a bit more. But he definitely is up there now. So, if they're banking on that sort of like success in the fandom, even if it isn't like super popular, like this could be, what pushes his, the characters sort of, into more the limelight, with Kyoshi and Roku and the rest of them. So I don't know. I think it's still, a good idea to have him more involved in this series. It's just really how are they going to put it with the story?
No, that is a good point though. That like how many people do actually know about the sort of like larger Karuk story. I remember the Avatar official YouTube channel did put up some polls on their community post about like how many of you guys have read the Korra comics, how many of you have read the Avatar comics, and it was very interesting to look at them and see like people who are actually like fully caught up have read everything. It's only like 7% of like a very general fan base, which you would say about the Avatar YouTube channel, because it's mainly clips, and while they reference deeper stuff, their audience definitely seems to be more of the fandom at large. So yeah, like we're talking about like less than 10% of the overall fandom is actually sort of similar to us, where we're up to date with everything. And then it was only like an extra sort of like 10-15% that has read like even a single comic. So it kind of highlights that probably there's maybe not a lot of people who are familiar with everything about Karuk, though I suppose just the fact that he is a past avatar. Avatars are like the main thing cool. In Avatar. People tend to know about that stuff more than maybe like really obscure characters. Like they might not know about Jeonju, but they might know about Karuk. Yeah, that is it for the news. I suppose the only other thing to say is just that Free Comic Book Day is coming up pretty soon. It's only like 3 weeks away. May 7th, we will be getting an Avatar comic that is half Avatar, half Korra again. We don't know anything about the specifics other than I guess Aang's going to be in it. And we will be reviewing that when it comes out. But we're just waiting to see more on that. And maybe in the days leading up to it we might find out more about it. But we've got some new content coming up shortly, but right now there's not really a lot to say about it. We would do a speculation on it, except there's nothing to speculate on. I think last podcast we talked about like, ooh, but Aang's in his book 3 outfit. Does that mean anything? Maybe. There's options to set stuff there, but that's about it. So we'll move on to our sort of main topic in a way for the episode. We'll get to, I suppose, the main topic, and that is the Legend of Korra 10-year anniversary. So April 14th, 2012 was the TV premiere, so the official kind of premiere date for K101 and K102, Welcome to Republic City and A Leaf in the Wind. Though, if you've been in the fandom for a while, you'll probably know that most fans, a lot of fans actually saw the episodes earlier because they released them via Coronation like 3 weeks before the premiere date. I actually only realized this because I went back to check like posts on like the Facebook page, and I was just like, whoa, why do we have our episode reviews up in like March when the episodes only premiered in April? And I'm like, oh yeah, Coronation actually like did big stuff back then. So it was cool to just remember that. But yeah, the anniversary day has been and gone. There was no news. Obviously, we just covered the news. Nothing really happened. The official channels did post about it, but it was literally just the same type of thing a lot of fans did. It was just, here's a clip, an image, they put up like a video clip thing of Korra clips, noting, a decade of Korra. That was really about it. They did have a kind of cool Korra 10-year anniversary logo, which I thought was quite cool. Not that they made it particularly like public or visible, and that if you were just scrolling through you might have missed it because it was like the kind of thumbnail of the video. It wasn't actually like in the video, so actually had to go into like the inspect element thing to actually get the image out of it. So that was a bit awkward, but definitely a sense where like the fandom came out in force to support Korra. It was a very positive day for Korra. Saw a lot of posts about it, but there was definitely a sense where like people were maybe a little bit disappointed, let down that there wasn't anything official or news about Korra, and adding on to the fact that like there's not really much Korra stuff out this year in terms of merchandise or anything like that. The Korra comic Patterns in Time being delayed out of basically literally released to celebrate the anniversary to we're nowhere near it. Just that sense of official disappointment, given that Avatar Studios is the thing, the fandom has never been more popular in a way. Just that kind of contrast between the fans are here ready, but it feels like there was no official support. That's my general thoughts on it. But what were your thoughts on the day, on the 14th for the anniversary?
Yeah, no, I think you had a good grasp on it there, and the fact that the fandom overall definitely acknowledged it. I saw, tons of posts with tons of people, linking back to stuff, when the show first started, or, sort of their initial sort of like reactions to it, or even before the show started, sort of their thoughts on it and stuff like that. But yeah, from any of the official places where it now is, home to, there didn't really seem to be a lot of, I guess, celebration or any sort of, larger sort of acknowledgement. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I wonder if it's just because they're, working on so much stuff that they just don't have, the manpower to put forth to it, or, they just don't see it maybe as a bigger thing as, we people who, have been following the show ourselves. So I don't know. It definitely is a interesting sort of comparison there to see sort of the support for the show and where it's currently coming from.
Yeah, definitely an interesting day. There's obviously maybe the slight worry that, would it really get the treatment that it deserves? But no, it did. It definitely got the popularity, and I think we've seen a general influx of popularity towards Korra since it returned to Netflix. That was definitely one thing that we saw. Just more appreciation for like the extra material, and not just like ATLA is the best. So that was cool. I took part in a kind of YouTuber kind of project that Antoine Vandelay organized, One Legendary Scene, which was kind of cool. The idea of it was that every YouTuber taking part picked a specific scene from Korra to do sort of like a video essay style thing on, to just sort of celebrate Korra on the anniversary. I picked Korra leaves the spirit portals open from the book 2 finale. Of course, had to do some book 2 spirits respect there to represent it, because I saw a lot of people weren't picking book 2 scenes, so I kind of felt I had to. So that was cool. People liked that, and I think people thought that was a kind of cool project. So I kind of want to know, Greg, what's your one legendary scene? What scene from Korra gets you sort of thinking, talking the most? That kind of just beans the most from Korra for you.
That's a good one. That was really a really good idea in terms of which ones to actually pick, and it was kind of hard. I went through like really quickly like the seasons of like what scenes sort of like stood out to me, and then I tried to like pick one from each season, which I think is what I ended up with. And then I think at the end I had one, which is funny, I had one from season 2, although not the same one, and then one from season 4. But I think for me, I probably would pick my one from season 4, just because it's revolved around Korra, and that's just sort of the creation of the spirit portal in Republic City. Just the whole battle leading up to it and everything. But just the idea of that being a thing that can sort of happen in the world, and how going forward that really sort of changed everything, and the importance that it had on the world at large. So that was the quick one that I went through developing after whittling down from about like maybe say 3, 4, I don't know, maybe like 12 different scenes I think I had, and I had like at least 3 or 4 from each season, like even ones from like, I don't know, I kind of wanted to pick ones I don't know that sort of stood out to me, and not all of them had, like I had one with Juan. I thought that would be a really good one from season 2. But yeah, there's a couple different ones. Most of them are revolved around Korra. Some of them aren't revolved around Korra, just because I think they're interesting towards the story overall, or at least that season. But yeah, no, there's so many different scenes, and I've seen some of the ones from some of the other people, and I think that's really cool to see. What stands out to people in their minds of the show overall, or what qualifies to them as sort of legendary in that sort of sense, or something that'll sort of like potentially stand the test of time in terms of the Avatar verse.
Yeah, I picked my scene pretty quickly, in that I initially went in with like, oh well, I guess beginnings, like Juan, probably like the Avatar fusing at the end. But then I kind of realized it's Korra, and that's like it's such an important part of Korra, getting that backstory. But I wanted to pick something that was about like Korra herself. It felt like better to do that to celebrate the anniversary, rather than like the other Avatar we find out about.
Yeah.
But there's still value in that. I think someone did pick that. But after that, it was like, yeah, had to do that scene. It helped that I was relatively recently like someone asked me to come on their podcast to talk about 214, so I was kind of like in the zone talking about that episode. So that came together pretty nicely. Fun fact, I was actually the first one in the project to finish their video. That was I made that video like a month ago.
Thanks.
I did it before Antoine did, and he was a bit like, oh, what? But anyway, yeah, other than that, like, it's just kind of to, remembering how hyped things were from 10 years ago. And it really was. Like, I'll always maintain that the fandom kind of throughout all of book 1 of Korra is probably the best time ever in the fandom for me. And I've been in the fandom since basically, like end of book 2 Earth, going into book 3. And I was more on the outskirts during Avatar, and so it was obviously exciting throughout all the book 3 stuff. But the hype building into Korra actually airing, was just crazy, I think, because of like second Avatar show, everything's so different, and rewatching these episodes really brought up just like, oh yeah, I remember how excited I was for this, because we knew lots from all the stuff that they put up on like the website ahead of time, so we sort of knew what we were talking about a little bit. but it was still so exciting to just see a new episode of Avatar. And we obviously, you can then talk about how things sort of died off a little bit after that because of the gap from book one into book two. That really killed the hype a little bit. And then behind the scenes production stuff throughout book three and four kind of obviously made us very much question Nickelodeon and sort of why aren't they supporting this show? The lack of merchandise, which was brought up quite heavily on the day a few days ago for the anniversary. We still don't have much Korra merchandise, and obviously we basically had none throughout the run of the show, except for like shot glasses and lunch boxes that Dark Horse put out. That's like the first pieces of merchandise, but no toy line ever. Only a few scattered expensive like statues for the most part. That's the kind of frustrating aspect of Korra, is that Nick didn't really support it, but the fandom certainly did, and that's in a way that defines Korra. That's the whole time of like, we got behind it, but for some reason Nickelodeon didn't. And you can then talk about how it was sort of like almost ahead of its time in terms of realizing that digital online only is sort of the way to go with this, not necessarily just airing it on TV, going for the TV ratings, which going into the new Avatar Studios project, it's going to be a streaming show. So, ahead of its time a little bit. But what are your memories from like 10 years ago, the lead in to Korra, the experience of these first few episodes?
Yeah, no, I think it's really hard to sort of, I guess from think of it now, how really, popular and hyped it was going into with all of the different sort of, I guess, outlets talking about the show. Just all the different sort of promotional materials, like you mentioned, the whole coronation thing, which, it's really interesting to sort of think about it now, just sort of how the whole thing worked. I mean, just the idea that, you share enough things, you get enough, clicks and links on it, and then you're able to get, various different, unlocks through their whole system they had set up. And, how it was even, more than just that, because that is, like you mentioned, that is how we were actually able to, watch the first episode. The whole, the whole site, how it basically looked like it was like, a locked thing from, the core, from the Avatar universe, and how it would just like open. And then, of course, that's how you watch the video, which is just like a skin on top of a website, right? Like it's nothing sort of like extra special or anything like that. But, it added to the whole, mystique of, watching this, new Avatar show. So, it really sort of added it to it, and just, everyone sort of getting behind it, and sort of the communication at the time of that, and just sort of how it was, 10 years ago, some of the social media networks didn't even exist, or they were in different forms. So the whole way of communicating with different people who were into the show was just sort of like a different process, which, for some people who, have been born later, or just, were into it at the time, it's just like the whole concept of it, or like we were mentioned before, just the whole idea of different, forms and how that worked overall, just, was completely different to how it is now, if those ones even sort of exist, because a lot of them don't exist. I was clicking some links that I had stored from, earlier things that we were talking about, and a lot of those sites, they just don't even exist, period. So it's interesting just to consider, how, the show was released earlier, and then, like you mentioned, how it had, like any show, every show has their ups and downs, and, Korra definitely had its fair share of them, from, different production things towards, its actual being released and stuff like that. So, it definitely took some different turns throughout the course of his 10 years so far, and just, how it was really, just sort of like in person at different conventions, which a lot of those I went to personally, since a lot of those were here on the East Coast, although they definitely had a whole bunch of them on the West Coast as well, since that's generally where a lot of, TV shows and movies are more so promoted. But there's so much that went on to it, especially in the beginning, that definitely sort of gets lost in time if you don't really think about it.
Yeah, the hype for those conventions, when we knew we were getting like a panel about like an upcoming book, or the panel is like halfway through the book, and like the one for Beginnings, for instance, where like everyone got to watch Beginnings Part 1. Even people watching
Oh
the
yeah.
stream at home got to watch it. That was so exciting that the episode that in a way everyone was waiting for, they just gave it to us there. And all the
Yeah.
concept art for different characters as we went into the seasons, those were like hugely exciting moments, and like we're hoping we get them again at like, whenever Avatar Studios makes their initial announcement. Hopefully it's at a convention or something like that, because it's going to be super exciting. But Coronation is a really good point to bring up, in that I still to this day have not seen another sort of like hype project in a way for a show done like that,
Hmm.
and it still feels like incredibly unique to me. I don't think it would work as well nowadays, just because there are so many people out there with huge social media followings that I think a lot of the contests about like getting the most points would be a little unfair. Whereas back then there wasn't maybe as many people who had like huge followings, um, and fandom wasn't focused in a way on Twitter and stuff like that. So I was able to actually place quite highly. I wouldn't these days. So, but
Yeah, ditto.
that was what was so exciting about it, was just that that was an official source of news, something we basically don't have anymore. Coronation was showing us concept art, videos, obviously the things we unlocked. Like we unlocked parts of the soundtrack on Coronation initially, like for not even getting too many points. Like everyone basically had access to get the soundtrack and some of those little things. There's like a I forget it, but the pro bending rule book that came out, I think that was through Coronation or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
so like you could get that as well, and all these kind of little things that were just very very cool. And then there was like contests and all, but that's where a lot of the information came from. Was they'd post images of the characters, trailers. All you had to do was basically follow Coronation, and you were kept mostly up to date with like official information. And I'm hoping they have something like that, that they can have like an official Avatar Studios thing, or they can convert the social media accounts that they have and are now quite popular to be more proper news sources, because we definitely need that. It's kind of frustrating to see like it kind of flip a coin if those official channels will actually cover the announcement of a new book or something like that. They did cover the Yang Chen novel quite quickly, which was good, but a lot of the times when like a new comic gets announced, they're months behind in actually like talking about it. So Coronation was very, very important, and it was, it really did keep the fandom going. Of course, it didn't help that they also had a big break. Like it was kind of 15 months for the most part with no Coronation. That was part of it in between book one and two, but it was a very cool thing. They obviously didn't do it much towards the end, and that there was only like two phases, I think, of it. But still, essential kind of part of the fandom at that time, because there's so many people who forget it existed, or were just not around in the fandom when it was a thing. And so whenever it gets mentioned, it's like, well, what was this amazing thing that I was not a part of? Um,
Yeah.
and that like I just posted on like Twitter like yesterday that like, hey, I won like an original piece of art of Mako from Coronation that's in the art book, and people were like, wait, what? What is this? And it's just kind of fun that like, oh yeah, like there's these like 10 pieces of art that only like these 10 people have out there, so it's kind of fun. But yeah, like 10 years of Korra, it's kind of hard to believe it's been 10 years. It's obviously since the start, so it's more like 8, since it ended, but still, um, exciting. And at least for me, like I've never had like a period of time where I felt like really down on Korra. It's more just been, I think, at times the fandom has felt like it's not been super supportive of Korra. But I think things have changed a lot relatively recently. Like the Kyoshi novels coming out and sort of creating like a third series in a way has kind of helped to bring up like, oh yeah, Korra is really good as well, and all this extra stuff in the universe is fantastic to see. But anything else you want to say about the 10 years of Korra? Any memories?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, the whole idea of coronation, I think, is really interesting. I mean, even I won stuff. I remember I won what was it, the pilot episodes for
Oh yeah.
Avatar, like the original unaired pilot episodes via iTunes, which is, I don't even really use that, but that was something that like you needed like a decent amount of shares to get to. And yeah, I remember when you got your item because you had to do the whole mailing thing in order to actually get it to you. But yeah, no, definitely, Korra has had, a lot of ups and downs, and I think, like you said, it recently has, seen a bit of resurgence. I think the idea in general recently is more so that Avatar overall has had more of just a general resurgence, especially with Kyoshi novels, and just the whole idea of how Viacom CBS is sort of, I guess, pushing Avatar overall as more of a whole unit rather than this series or that series, which there's still plenty of that in the fandom overall. So there's always going to be that in general towards of who has a preference more towards one or the other. But I guess sort of as time goes on from the 10 years of Korra and the X amount of years from Avatar overall, that it sort of bleeds more into a whole as sort of the original sort of nostalgia for it I guess sort of calms down or dies down in terms of which one you saw first when it came out, but no, I think Korra definitely has a lot going for it, and there's plenty of people still putting out their own sort of like original content for it, in hopes of, when Avatar Studios does come out with whatever their next big Avatar project actually is of the movie. So no, there's definitely a lot towards it that has gone for the past 10 years, and hopefully a lot more going forward.
Yeah, and like, the shows are always going to get compared. I know some people will argue that you shouldn't compare them, but they're of similar lengths. Obviously one's 3 books, one's 4 books. They're formatted slightly differently, but they're made by roughly the same people. Of course they're going to get compared, and it's fine to compare them. It's just, you don't need to compare them at all times. You can like just appreciate them on their own as well. In that, like, I'm just as willing to reference like the comics and the books as I am either series. But if you ask me to compare them, I can say that, like, yeah, I tend to prefer Avatar over Korra, but it's close, and that I still really, really like Korra. It's not like Korra's like miles below Avatar or anything like that. I'm always kind of, in a way, campaigning for just like, can we have less extreme opinions in this fandom? That like, I like book 2 a lot. I'm not trying to convince you that book 2 is the best book of Korra. I'm just trying to convince you that it's not like 20 review score points off the back of the next best book of Korra. It's there and thereabouts at the very least. So it was cool to see the general positivity there over the anniversary. But we'll move into the reviews here to sort of also celebrate the anniversary. So these are the first 2 episodes that obviously aired on the 14th, and the 2 that were available to view on Coronation ahead of time. These are what started it off. So just before we jump straight into the review, this is more of just to sort of get feedback for future podcasts. We are willing to do more review podcasts basically going forward. Basically do almost like a full re-review of both series if you guys listening actually are interested in that. Part of this is just that we're probably at least a year away from the Netflix show. We're probably maybe like 2+ years away from the us actually getting the episodes for the first Avatar Studios project. So there's still going to be a lot of time on the podcast where we won't have content to cover. So it will be mainly news. And I think it's somewhat worthwhile that we can do news and also do the kind of re-review series as we go through. The other part of that is just that a lot of the older episodes of the podcast aren't really available to listen to anymore, or they're maybe a little bit sort of out of date because we reviewed them back in the middle of Korra or whatever. I think there's value to doing a more kind of modern review reflective of like where we are now in the fandom. So we're obviously reviewing the first 2 episodes of Korra today. The plan, if you guys want us to do this and are interested in it, is that The next podcast will be reviewing 101 and 102 from Avatar, just to have sort of like an intro Avatar episode. But then all the review podcasts going forward would be one episode of Korra, one episode of Avatar. So you'd be reviewing at least 2 episodes on each podcast, but both series at like roughly the same time. That way we're not focusing too much on one series or the other. We're also not committing to doing like 100+ episodes just reviewing one episode when we've already reviewed them before. This way we can go through the series a bit quicker and just focus in on sort of the important aspects of each one. We're still going to fundamentally try and make them a normal review like you'd expect from the podcast, but just a little bit more to the point, reflecting that it will be like a 2022-2023 review, bringing in like all the content, making all the connections we possibly can. I think it's a good thing when, realistically the Yang Chen novels for the next year or two are maybe going to be the only like big thing that we really get a chance to like go in depth on. So there's that. Like, obviously we'd maybe put the reviews aside for a little bit if other stuff does come up that requires a bit more time, but that we are doing more of a kind of series of kind of discussions going forward. I definitely think there's some value in that, but Greg, what are your thoughts on this, doing more reviews?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something that can be added to the conversation from, our current perspective in the fandom and with the current, I guess, extra media that has come out since. There are, some holes, I guess, that we can fill now that we sort of understand things a little bit better, or can hopefully draw some new conclusion points that we wouldn't have already thought of before, just with the whole history aspect. And as, like you said, Yang Chen comes out, and if we ever get, any additional books or anything along those lines, there's definitely more things that we can sort of help, sort of see through in terms of the story bits as we go forward.
Yeah, and a lot of this also comes down to like when I listen to podcasts myself, and I'm like, oh, this Star Wars podcast is really cool, but I really like to know what the hosts like feel about like the Phantom Menace. They reference it every so often, but I don't actually know how they feel about the movie overall. And either because like they haven't reviewed it because they've only started in the last few years, or the last time they reviewed it was like 10 years ago or something like that. I definitely think there's value to doing re-reviews just for like new fans, and that I think most of our review content is definitely pre-Netflix, like the show returning to Netflix, which a surprising amount of the fandom that's like active currently is like returning Netflix fans or new fans because of the show's back on Netflix. So I definitely think that's worth doing. And of course there will be stuff like where I think so we're not doing too many episodes, we probably will be grouping like say certain Avatar episodes together, so that we have like say we get to like, for example, say 105 and 106, for instance. Like we probably don't need to do those separately, so we can maybe like group them together, do like 1 Korra episode, 2 Avatar episodes, but then we probably need to like focus really heavily in on say just this one episode. So there's things that we can do definitely as we go forward. But for now, we'll start off here with Korra episode 1 and episode 2. Welcome to Republic City and A Leaf in the Wind. So, of course, we're going to start with episode 1, Welcome to Republic City. I've always felt this is a fantastic opening episode of the series. I've always loved 101. It is weird when I look at like my list of episodes because I have them all ranked, and I note that this one's only like ranked 30 out of 52 for me, but it speaks to, I think, how high quality Korra is overall, that this really strong intro episode to a whole new era of Avatar is only ranked 30th, but it's still one of the strong episodes. We'll get into it more, but just some opening thoughts from you on Welcome to Republic City.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's funny that it's ranked there on your list, but I mean, there really are, a lot of good episodes, so it can be really hard when you're sort of numbering things like that. But I think, for me, I think, rewatching it here, just for my, quick initial impressions, it really, it did a really good job of, I guess, sort of setting the stage of this show and this sort of new world that we don't really, we understand the lore and sort of the history, but we don't really understand how it works in this time period. And I think, for, essentially seeing it through Korra's eyes here for the first time, it does a pretty good job of just, laying out sort of the groundwork of how things work, how things don't work, and what might be, some of the issues coming up throughout the whole show overall, or it's through, Korra's time as being the Avatar, at least initially.
And I also think it's important to note, given that we're trying to like bring in all the sort of different connective tissue, where the comics were at this time. The comics pretty much, in a way, start with Korra, and a lot of the major comics do come to an end with the end of Korra, in that I think as of the airing of this episode, only The Promise Part 1 is actually out. But The Promise does feature sort of thematic, location setup for Republic City. Obviously it's more the Rift with, early Cranefish that is actually Republic City. But I think Udao is technically a part of the United Republic of Nations by the time we get around to it. But it is interesting that they actually did have both franchises kind of covering the events, just with the comics a little bit more slowly, in that obviously we only got to the core ideas throughout The Promise by the end of like, this is what they're going for, and it was more towards the end of Korra when the Rift Part 3 came out and we had the full context there, and then Imbalance only comes out like much later, like much more recently, to fully connect the dots. But even still, like, they haven't really bridged the gap between the two series all that much. Like, this in a way is part of the legacy of like Korra, but I'd say more the franchise of kind of what they haven't done is that everyone has been demanding for years, tell us stuff about the characters in between the series. And it's been pretty incredible how little we've actually got, to the point where like last year's Free Comic Book Day actually featuring a story set in the gap was an amazingly pleasant surprise to us. So I suppose let's just open up there with regards to that idea of like, we are so far on from Korra. What are your thoughts on how they haven't really delved too much into the 70-year gap between the series?
Yeah, no, that definitely is a factor that has been brought up many times in the fandom, which, I guess the whole hope for that is that, the new projects for Avatar Studios will, hopefully finally address that, or at least that's what a lot of people are gearing towards here. But yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of this episode, I mean, they do the intro in the beginning, so, you have a little bit of the history here, but even those, which it isn't that much, but, with Tenzin narrating it, it just shows you just like a little bit of it and tells you sort of what has passed, and even in that it's just sort of their the images of them from when they were a lot younger. It's not even their like their comic outfits or anything like that, which are or their sort of character designs. That wasn't super huge of a thing then, or at least from when they initially actually did the show, since I'm assuming the production of the show was before a lot of the comic stuff. So it definitely is something that people definitely really want more of overall, which is, I think, when we do get to those points in the show overall, when they do have any of those sort of flashbacks, they really add a lot to it. And for a lot of people who were especially more connected with the original series, that means even almost more to them in that regard there. So it definitely is something that I know many people hope that they do in the coming years.
Yeah, and that is an interesting point. It's just like, some people do criticize Korra because it doesn't feature as much of the other characters, and they reveal that, oh,
Mhm.
a couple of these characters are actually dead by the time Korra as a series starts. And I've always been like, no, I actually think they did it really well here of letting the new characters shine, but using the surviving older characters to sort of help and act as the legendary masters that were in ATLA. That Katara is the Paku or Gran Gran type character in this one. Zuko is
Yeah.
the Iroh of this series, in that he's not the focus, but he comes into focus at times. Toph comes in and gets her chance to shine a little bit, but they never take over the series. There's definitely frustrations about the lack of information, but I don't think a lot of it is on Korra as a series. I think it's more just at the franchise direction overall that we don't know things like, is May Izumi's mother? Like core canon relationships between the characters that we still don't know all these years on. Are they a couple? Like, what's the deal with Sokka and Suki? Like, is Suki dead? What's up with Azula, for instance? Like, that's probably one of the bigger ones. Like, she's just not in Korra at all, not mentioned. Her story is stopped as of the Smoke and Shadow. What's going on there? Um, there's a lot of those kind of type things, but I don't think it's on Korra that they didn't do more with them, because I think they ultimately utilized those characters pretty well. Like in this episode, for instance, Katara actually plays a very nice role as basically being Gran Gran from 101 to Katara and Sokka, thinking like, oh, she's going to stop Korra from going, but no, she's actually the cool Gran Gran and lets, Korra, the kids go. So what are your thoughts on how Korra uses the legacy cast, I suppose?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a really good topic there. And I think, I don't know, I think that's one of the things that's probably like a hard distinction for people to sort of come to grips with, which I think, is also just like an age thing as well, in terms of just, being able to let different things go, which of course, the show deals with a lot of that overall. So, it might be something that you can, develop as the show itself goes on overall. But yeah, I mean, the show, the characters that are more older, like, depending on their actual age in the show, some of them are used a lot more, some of them are used a lot little. Here in the beginning, we see how Katara is used, which, like you said, is almost exactly like Gran Gran from the original series in terms of just being, telling, Korra that this is her time to actually, take over and sort of help things move forward, which, by the end of the episode is something, or the episodes that we're talking about today is something that, Korra eventually realizes herself as well. So, something that you have to sort of develop and sort of understand overall. And, I think for me personally, I think, I would, of course I would like to know what happened to the characters, but in terms of Korra, it's a story about her and her journey. So, yeah, those characters will be around, and it definitely would be nice to know about some of them more. But, I don't know if the show should have solely focused on that. I think, best case scenario, they should do a show about, those sort of adventures, or, a movie about what actually happened there, even if it's just, one contained story. But, we do get some of it in Korra eventually, and I think those are definitely nice to have as well.
But that's the thing, like, Avatar Studios now feels like the right time to fill in that gap. It's been long enough since ATLA where, like, the part of the reason like the creators made Korra and didn't just do an ATLA follow-up is that they've said basically in interviews they just wanted to do something different and like unique and different, and not just like a follow-up. But I think enough time has passed now where like there's value to filling in that gap and, doing the sort of fan service that people want, of just showing the characters older, those key moments that we want to see, and show us Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph in their primes, at the height of their power, like we've always wanted to see them. and that makes sense to do as an Avatar Studios project. Whereas I respect their decision to not go for it like 10 years ago, but we probably have needed a bit more on them in the intervening time. The final thing, I suppose, before we dive directly into the episode is just that I think we have to just talk about Republic City, which is sort of, and United Republic of Nations, as the sort of key transition event. Like, this is what is effectively talked about in like the extended opening for the first episode, that the legacy of Aang and Team Avatar is the end of the war, but the end of the war allowed for the nations to come together and effectively lead to the formation of Republic City, United Republic of Nations. And this is effectively what Korra has to deal with in her era, is, wait, everything's kind of connected together, this mishmash of a city, it's the height of technology in the world, and this is the city that is ultimately what the success of Aang and co. Aang, Zuko, everyone else helped to create this city, and this is why it's important for Korra to become the Avatar and help get this city back on track. And I've always liked that, in addition to what I was saying earlier on about like the comics as like a general arc help to explain what Republic City was, where it came from. They maybe haven't gone as far with it as you maybe want, but the core ideas are there across a couple of those comic series. So what are your thoughts on Republic City as being like the central point of like, this is what's different effectively in the Korra era?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the strengths, and from some people's perspectives, maybe one of the weaknesses of just how focused it is on this area. For me personally, as someone who's lived around cities, and that whole idea and the whole mishmash of cultures and personalities, for me, it really worked for me overall. Like, I like the idea that that is sort of the main, I guess you could say, like, linchpin of the series. And they do explore other places, and those places are cool to see because they're sort of new and updated, and they sort of expand upon the world that's different from what we saw in the original ATLA series. But I think what they're going for in this one, and what they sort of show over the course of the comics as this being sort of the new hub for the world overall. It makes sense to me that this is where Korra would land eventually, and would see that this is where at least initially throughout her career as the Avatar would focus a lot of her energies in the beginning. This is like her first real sort of like adventure, is sort of like its own sort of, I guess, microcosm of having to travel the world and learn about the different cultures and learn how people interact with each other. This is like sort of like basically like a testing ground for her to actually sort of figure out all this stuff out right here in the beginning of her Avatar journey. And she's she's still not technically a full Avatar yet. Like, she's still working on airbending as of this point right now, so she doesn't have everything figured out, but she's working towards that goal, while being in the city where pretty much everything is new to her. Like, just even her just like getting off of the boat is like an experience for her.
And it is interesting that this is the central point, and this episode basically introduces us to the idea of Korra comes to the city, which she's only heard great things about, sees all these problems. How many of those problems are solved by the end of the series? And it actually is quite a few of them, because by the end you see that, okay, the bender non-bender issue, I guess, is mostly solved by virtue of we've had 2 non-bender presidents in a row, and it's not really brought up, so it's better at the very least. So that's fine. We now have a portal in Republic City, so spirits are also now another addition into the city that will have to be dealt with, but that's what Korra's trying to do. Part of the city is spirit vines now as well, so it's been changed in a way because of things that have happened around or Korra has done. So there's that. And you can see just little kind of things like that have happened, that like the triads are not as big of a problem as they maybe seem in this opening episode. So you do see Korra has made changes, but that obviously it's never going to be perfect, because just you can't ever like stop every single problem from happening. But ultimately the city, despite a lot of crises that have happened, um, is probably in a better situation now than it was at the start. Though maybe some people might disagree with that. But change happens because the Korra as a series happens, and it's just interesting to reflect back on, like, oh yeah, like it is very different now from what it used to be. But let's get more into, I suppose, the general idea of the episode. Again, the plan for these reviews is not to just go through it scene by scene. We'll mainly just pick out specific kind of, if we want to talk about specific scenes, kind of themes, little connections type things. But I suppose, Greg, what's the first thing you want to talk about from the rest of this episode?
All right. So, I mean, I guess since we sort of already alluded to it, but I guess just sort of Korra in terms of her acclimation to the new city life here, in terms of, how she starts now, and in terms of where, I guess she eventually gets to later on, just sort of how, I don't know, how, I guess sort of, I mean, they even say, like, what do they call her? Like a country, southern bumping in this one, just, her coming to grasp with that, or just how, I don't know, you can see, how even though she's such a powerful, Bender overall, she's lived a pretty sort of like sheltered life. Like, she doesn't have any sort of money on her, although it seems like she understands that concept at least. How she doesn't really, I don't know, just sort of is, I guess, at least initially sort of floundering in the initial, I guess, sort of culture shock of city life. Even just talking with, the other, hobo while she's, cooking the fish in, the park, which, to anyone who's from the city, that's like something that you would never even think of even doing. But, Korra just goes ahead and does that.
Yeah, it's interesting because like this kind of ends up being like one of the main things across the series, is that the villains Korra encounters, like, their ideals actually affect her, because she, in a way, doesn't have that many kind of views of her own, because, like you said, she has such a sheltered upbringing with the way her training went. She basically only knows about this city from, like, legend, that it's the city that Aang formed and it must be amazing. And she gets there and sees on the outside that amazingness, but then getting into the sort of like details, realizes that, oh, there's problems around like every corner here, in a way that this city does need her. And I like this, that idea of, like, at the core, it's just she earnestly does want to be the Avatar, want to help, but she hasn't really been like equipped to deal with the problems in the way that she needs to. And it makes it so interesting that, like, obviously she's effectively is the exact opposite of Aang as the Avatar. Aang as a nomad is actually like familiar with all parts of the world. His knowledge is just a little bit out of date, but he is familiar with the world. So he's like guiding our, southern characters around, and they're the ones that are shocked by it. Whereas it's the opposite here. She's experiencing everywhere new for the first time, but she has the skills that Aang didn't quite have, and that she's actually capable of solving issues, but she doesn't maybe have the other skills that Aang had, that he could maybe deal with issues by talking to people and so on. So it's really good that the way that works, and that it's just like opposite, and just it makes this series so interesting, that like that is exactly what this episode is about. She comes here, realizes, okay, bit of a problem with maybe like homelessness. With Gamu, I suppose it ultimately comes down to the idea of, like, he was put out of his job because of technology increasing, and that he's like telecoms, and he found out he was like a military, like a radio operator, but like it's the previous technology, and that's why he doesn't have a job anymore. And there's stuff like that happening. then she encounters like the biggest shock for her, of course, is people who are against bending or have issues with benders from that sort of like power dynamic thing, where because she's grown up in like basically a training compound for bending, surrounded mostly by benders, this is something she's never encountered before. So this is where you really see the whole, you're repressing yourself is like, it's a funny line, but it's also like, well, she doesn't have any like foundation to, I suppose, say anything else about it. So she really has to learn about this. So that's key. And then the problem that is like maybe more ideal for her to deal with, which is just like, oh, triads, I can beat up these guys. But then she has to encounter like, oh, the law, you can't just do this on a whim. You have to do it like the right way. But that also maybe creates the problem of like, oh, the police force is maybe not focusing on the right things here. Why weren't they there to deal with this issue? Why did it require her to do it? And then she's the one who gets in trouble and not them necessarily. A lot of that stuff is kind of cool, but I suppose, what are your thoughts on some of those basically themes that get brought up here? Which of them kind of stand out to you, the issues that Korra encounters in the city?
Yeah, no, that's a good point there. Like, is it, corruption in the city that she's encountering for the first time that she has to deal with? Or is it sort of, I guess, sort of what we were saying earlier about like sort of the emerging technology that is sort of displacing people, which of course, eventually, she kind of has a hand in even a larger form of displacement in the residents there. But, there's a lot of, I guess, sort of points there where she's having to, I guess, confront these issues. And I guess, this is where maybe it could be seen as a positive that she's coming in from the outside, because she has a different perspective on things. Even, if, per the people in the city or, per, Lynn or anyone like that, like, it seems like it's a bit sort of like backwards or backwater, because she's coming from somewhere else. But, it's like she has a clear view of things, being unimpeached by, the current, I guess, standard of city living that they have there. So I think, that definitely, it opens up so many different, possibilities of what can happen as we see later on in the series, when Korra is actually, dealing with the triads and the triple threats, and, how, she tries to actually handle them, which unfortunately in this one she doesn't do it the best way, because she doesn't quite understand sort of the rules of, let's say, like property damage, which she definitely causes a lot of, unfortunately. But her heart at least is in the right place, which I think is what you sort of get by the end of the episode.
And to go into just like, I suppose, more on Korra's character, like I think we have to go back to like the kind of opening scene where we actually meet her as like a 4-year-old kid, and we find out that oh, Korra's like avatar training is different even than Aang's, and that she's actually discovered as the avatar at 4, not like told at 16. And she knows she's the avatar straight away. Like at 4 she can already bend 3 elements to a certain degree. And then we get the first stage of a like 3-season long reveal about why she's like in this facility in this way. Why is her training happening like this? The White Lotus guy, I think, directly says, Aang wanted you to like train here so we could keep you safe, which is obviously a lie, and it's actually Tenzin and her father who organized it. That's what we find out in book 2. But then in book 3 we find out that actually the reason why it's happened like this is because of the Red Lotus attack that happens, I guess, in the months following her discovery as the Avatar. So that's a really interesting connection to make, that like you find out part of the story here, but then you actually find out the real reason, that this is fundamentally why she has an isolated upbringing. And was that the correct approach to take to protect her? Yes, good. But you miss out on usually what makes a lot of the avatars good, which is that they have a worldwide training that incorporates them with the rest of the world. Korra goes in with like none of that, and that's what like makes her character kind of so interesting, and that she's one of the most sort of physically capable avatars, but the least set up in terms of her like worldview in a way, because she's only been trained in secret in the
Hmm.
South. So I've always liked that aspect, that we find out just straight away that, again, opposite of Aang. Aang's the reluctant avatar. Korra wants to be it from even 4 years old. Nothing like throughout the whole like opening section of the episode, it's just her wanting to continue her training, excited for Tenzin to come so she can move on to air, so she can become the avatar, and deciding to make, I suppose, a rebellious move for like one of the first times and actually, you know, sneak out. She has to make progress at this point, and that's sort of like the kind of key character aspect of this opening episode, is like she's done sort of just going by the rules of the facility. She has to actually be the avatar now. Otherwise, she's not really going anywhere, and she can't wait years for Tenzin. So, what are your thoughts on the, I suppose, that just the opening section of the episode before, as she builds up to making the decision to go to Republic City?
Yeah, no, that's a real key point of her character. Like you said, there is like she has been so isolated, and she does know the bendings of the world, but she doesn't really know the people of the world, which is quite unfortunate, because I mean that's really a key thing of the avatars, being able to interact with peoples of different culture and to solve their issues. And yeah, bending is like an important part of it, and that is something that probably will always be there to some degree, especially with people who would use their abilities to take advantage of things. But especially in this show, shows that as I guess society becomes hopefully more advanced or more civilized, depending on your perspective, that might not always be something that's as needed as sort of like a first stop in terms of reacting to different situations here. But yeah, no, of course, she's definitely, ready to be the avatar, but doesn't quite understand everything. And, they even, they do mention, that she's, has never really excelled at the spiritual side of things, which is, of course, why she wants to train with Tenzin, and, airbending specifically, because, that's his thing. He's Mr. Spiritual. But, it almost makes you wonder, should they have put more of an emphasis on that, from the get-go? Like, I'm sure, even though she's so reluctant to it now at her age now, at 4, I'm sure she probably, hopefully, might have been a little bit more receptive to learning that, rather than waiting later on. So, that could also just be seen as a fault of her elders, and how they decided to protect her in this situation, which again, we don't know the full grasp of it right now, but we know the whole idea with the Red Lotus and everything else that comes into play later on. So I know it's definitely an interesting thing to consider what may have been, but we see how this does play out in terms of her story, and it's like anything else, it's just a process, and that's part of what makes it cool to see her journey on this process, and how it goes up and down for her throughout the whole season or show.
Yeah, your point about the spirituality is actually quite interesting, because you then reflect on it and realize, like, okay, she's here because of Tenzin and Tonraq. Tenzin turns out not actually to be Mr. Spiritual. Like, literally, plot point in book 2. Janora is more spiritual than him. Bumi is actually more spiritual than him. He knows spiritual things because he's, like, studied it, but he actually does not have a strong spiritual connection. And then her father is basically anti-spirit in a way, until, like, he opens up a little bit more in book 2. So the two people, like, sort of, like, controlling Korra's, destiny in a way, are actually, like, not helping her in that front, in that you get the idea that Tonraq probably keeps her from ever going to, like, the north, because of his issues with his brother, who is actually spiritual, and the north is more spiritual. And then because they want to keep her in the south, they keep her, I guess, away from any spiritual part of, like, air temples, obviously, because Tenzin's the only one who can train her, but spiritual parts of, like, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, and so on. Like, this is kind of why it happens. It's like, in a way, the flaws of those two characters, which we kind of learn about in book 2, which is quite interesting. But what's the next talking point you want to bring up?
Um, for this episode, I mean, I don't know. I guess the only other thing that I would bring up over here is just sort of, I guess, sort of right when we get towards the ending of, sort of Korra just interacting with Lin for the first time and just, I guess, sort of starting to see some of the politics of the city overall. Just sort of the initial idea of how things are actually working, how Korra's, trying to be involved in things and how she eventually, does sort of get her way to actually sort of stay there and train and help out with the city, hopefully.
Yeah. The Lin scene is very fun, and it's actually quite interesting that we're doing this review now because obviously the free comic from last year had basically like a reference to this with the scene with like Tenzin being brought before Toph and like Aang coming in, and it's like the same dynamic as like Tenzin coming in to save Korra here from Lin. And obviously we have one of the early kind of funny meme moments with the, I've got my eyes on you thing that they do to each other, and especially like Korra's one, and Lin's reaction to it. But just kind of highlighting that, like, oh wow, like random reveal in the middle of the episode that like this is Toph's daughter, and we're like, oh cool, this is nice. And there's obviously something between Lin and Tenzin, we find out. You get the sense, even though they don't directly reference it here. But yeah, basically finding out that like, oh hey Korra, like you're not allowed to be a vigilante. There is actually a police force here that does things. So it's her trying to find out like what is her position in the kind of structure of the city. It's something that effectively like takes her until like book 4 to actually find it out, because she's either like here inexperienced, 2 sort of like left out of things and not really considered, like kind of disrespected as the Avatar, 3 she's banished from the city, 4 she's injured until she returns, and finally is like, okay, you are actually a respected kind of pseudo leader in the city, you can do things. I like that sort of kind of growth in a way of the character. That like throughout this book we go on to have the idea of she joins like the task force, but then obviously problems happen there with Tarlok, and she forms her own team Avatar and kind of realizes that like, hey, I'm the Avatar. I'm a, in a way she sort of like is allowed to be a vigilante because she's the Avatar, and sort of just because she gets sort of some respect from Lin, is sort of roughly allowed to do it because she is actually helping, and realizes, okay, once I don't cause a lot of damage, I can actually do this if I want. So just that kind of understanding of like, okay, I get what I did wrong, but you do need to let me do things, Lin, because obviously the reason the triads are such a problem is because the police haven't been tackling them, and it takes the Equalists attacking to actually really damage the triads in the city, which is quite interesting. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, the Tenzin Korra dynamic of Tenzin initially can't train her, and he wants to send her straight back home. I like the little arc of this, of the line from Korra is, being cooped up and hidden away from the world isn't helping me become a better Avatar. I saw a lot of the city today, and it's totally out of whack. I understand now why you need to stay. Republic City does need you, but it needs me too. You get a scene then as like they're walking to the dock, the pier, and Tenzin looks at the Aang statue. Yep. I think that's a great scene as he just realizes that like Aang formed this city. It needs someone like that. And then he, tells Korra, that she can actually, stay, which is pretty good. He says, I've done my best to guide Republic City towards the dream my father had for it, but you're right, it's fallen out of balance since he passed. I thought I should put off your training in order to uphold his legacy, but you are his legacy. You may stay and train airbending with me. It's literally just like sort of 2 lines of dialogue and Tenzin looking at the statue, but I think it really works, and it's sort of the early sign of like, even though Korra and Tenzin actually have like issues for a lot of the early books because they actually don't function super well as like teacher and kind of pupil, just because they're so different. This is sort of the idea of like Tenzin can learn just as much from Korra as she can from him, and that it takes into book 2 right at the end for them to really find out what their dynamic is with each other properly. But what are your thoughts on that core dynamic of this episode? Like Tenzin finally allowing Korra to stay and start the training here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice dynamic that they show here. Just, the idea that he, even though, he gets knocked on for, maybe not having the most patience, as you might expect an airbender to actually have, he definitely, is very reflective of what's going on, as soon as there is, a bit of downtime, and, he eventually does let her stay. And, even Korra, like, when we go to the last scene where, she's sort of making her, speech to the city, even she, in the beginning recognizes that she doesn't really have like all of the answers to what's going on in the city or how to solve any of them. She's, still training as an avatar technically. She's willing to put forth, the effort in order to combat or to help what she sees going on in Republic City as of now.
Mm-hmm. They're most of the main topics. There's a few, I suppose, smaller scenes I think should be mentioned. Like, all these years later, it's still a very fun scene where when the Air Kids arrive, and one of the first things they say to her is, what happened to Zuko's mom? And again, the timing with the comics of like, this is like March, April 2012. The Search Part 3, so the final part of the Search, doesn't come out until November 12th, 2013. And, the first part doesn't even come out until I think post book 1 has aired fully. So it's interesting to know in production in terms of like, we've known for a while that I think they had like plans for part of the story, but like, did they know that there was going to be the Search comic, and so this is why they made that reference? Or was it just like referencing people's reaction to the cliffhanger from ATLA? That one is very interesting to consider in terms of like, there's still like a year between it, and then obviously you probably have to go back a year again in terms of when the episode was actually like written and stuff like that. But do you have any thoughts on that one, the reference to Ursa here in the episode, yet it's not until like a year afterwards that we actually get the answer?
Yeah, that's always like a good one to actually mention there, and I take it to be more just sort of the fandom at large, and sort of that being something that people really want to know, and the idea that they did have something potentially half written to actually sort of address that, but it's something that never came to pass. I think that was sort of the idea for its inclusion here, which I think is it's fun. It's like a tease thing, which I'm sure upset as many people as it made some people excited as well. So I think those, I don't know, it's cool when it does do those sort of references. I mean, sometimes they can be hit or miss, and it kind of can backfire sometimes, but I think the fact that it did eventually come out what actually happened, I think is it works for what they're trying to go for, even if still some people don't quite know what actually happened because they're not particularly into the comics or haven't looked at the wiki or anything like that.
And then just another quick one is just that, like, even like 10 years on, I still have a little bit of an emotional reaction to like Tenzin's first like scene in the show when he arrives in with his family, and it's just this reveal that, wow, there are multiple airbenders now. That like Aang wasn't the last airbender forever. That sure, there's only one airbending master, but they're coming back basically. And there's just that kind of fun emotion about just like, yeah, we only had one airbender basically in the original show, because the genocide of the Air Nation was like a huge plot point, the main plot point. But now we have more, and it's just like, wow, this is so cool to see that there are like 4 airbenders, 5, I suppose, including Korra, still have that reaction all these years on. It's just like, yeah, it's cool, Air Kids, like just the fandom immediately like grouping them as like the Air Kids and so on. And there's a few other kind of reactions like that of like even just seeing like, oh, like Korra's introduction and like, oh look, her parents, like an avatar who has parents, and we get to explore Tonrock and Senna a little bit over the course of the series as well. There's those kind of fun, different dynamics as well. Were there any kind of moments, kind of rewatching these episodes for you, where you're just like, wow, like 10 years on, it's still like that was such a cool moment, remembering like seeing that for the first time?
I think that one definitely is one. I think the other one for me, and I think this was even in the trailers as well, but seeing the metal bending officers, the cops, I think that was a really cool moment for me. Just just the whole idea of them using metal bending or the cables in that sort of way, I think is really cool. The whole chase scene that they have with Korra right in the beginning, I really remember that one just being a really cool one, seeing how that's developed, I guess, post 60, 70 years later on. I think that's probably one of the other smaller scenes that stood out to me, other than just the fact that there are more airbenders in general. I think for me, it worked more when you get to see more of the air kids, maybe more so in the next episode where you actually get to see them do some bending, because then it's like, oh, they're actually like really good and like, like mini masters essentially, since there is really only so many of them. So but yeah, no, I think the metal bending officers was the one for me for sure.
Yeah. And then with the first episode here, about the only thing I have is just kind of noting again that the technology, just like airships being like the big one, that they were introduced in ATLA, but now they're just like here in the city. We've got cars, automobiles as well, big kind of container ships basically as well. That's what Korra arrives in on. And it's like, whoa, this is very different, that the world has changed a lot in 70 years. It's just still to this day, still very interesting to see that big shot of the city when Korra walks out and you see the bridge and the airships overhead, and it's like, this is different. That was still impressive. But do you have any thoughts on the technology level here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's like one of the key things as the show keeps going, that, can go either positive or negative depending on your point of view. But for me, I thought it was really cool just to see, essentially like the Industrial Revolution, like how, everything's being sort of modernized with, the key thing in mind that there is bending in this world. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely similarities with our own world, but this is Avatar, and it has its own fantasy spin on things in terms of the bending. So integration with that is the key thing to sort of keep in mind, and you get to see more of that as the series progresses as well.
Yeah, I think that's most of the first episode. Like obviously Amon right at the end is like the cliffhanger reveal. There's obviously a fun thing to note, and like one of the posters on the wall is the blueprints for the mecha tanks, which aren't revealed until like episode 7. So that's a fun little thing to catch. But just ominous reveal of our kind of masked villain. There's not too much to say about Amon from the first 2 episodes, just that like great voices for him and the lieutenant basically. But going into 102, A Leaf in the Wind. Very pro bending focused episode. It's obviously the intro of Mako and Bolin, but it's very much the pro bending episode. I think on my list I have this one at like 39 out of 52. I think it's roughly like, I think probably the second lowest book 1 episode, given that I'll definitely say about book 1, really high quality throughout. Like these are really, really strong episodes for the most part. I think a lot of the fandom really sleep on just how good book 1 actually is, with, in my mind, like 105 and a little bit of 102 being the only, I think, weaker points. Maybe a little bit with the ending not explaining enough, but minor points overall, really, really strong. But I suppose, yeah, just so what are your general thoughts on the second episode?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, I really like it. I think, it works well in terms of, introducing us to our new characters here. It also shows us a bit of, Korra's, initial sort of airbending training and what sort of isn't working, what does sort of work for her by the end of it. It does I don't know, a good job overall of just exploring another aspect of Republic City through the lens of her training here. So for me, it works pretty well. And I also really do like, pro bending overall. So of course that, effect actually works for me. But yeah, no, it's a fun episode.
Yeah, like I still really enjoy this episode. Like it sounds terrible when you say it's like, oh, it's my 39th favorite episode out of 52, but there's only like a group of like 4 or 5 at the end that like there's actually major criticisms with. This one is still quite good. So I'll open this up here with the discussion of, I guess, the Korra struggling with airbending, because most of the episode is on the pro bending stuff. They just quickly go through the idea that, of course, Korra and Tenzin, they're a bit at odds with each other with regards to their personalities, but mainly, airbending training does not match up with Korra at all. That's the big thing that we get here, and we get this dynamic that it's very interesting that this is one of those points where like people who are very much like Avatar is the best always view this as being maybe a little bit of a problem, that like, oh, this contradicts Avatar, where like it should be opposite element that you struggle with, when actually this reveals that it's opposite personality, which I think makes a lot more sense. That Aang is a typical airbender, so he struggles with earthbending. Korra is not really a typical water tribe, personality based on what we've seen. So she struggles with something different, and it's actually air that is what she struggles with. I really like that dynamic, and that it highlights that personality is like the bigger deal than specifically problems relating to just the element itself. That's kind of nice to know, but just that, yeah, she's going to struggle with this thing that requires a little bit more patience, an element that has more of a philosophy like associated with it, and it's not just like directly a martial art power type thing. In that the whole meditation, the air nomad aspects of the training, it just doesn't really work for her. She can't meditate. She struggles with the more kind of subtle training things like the air gates. And I like that contrast of like Jinora does it and it's so graceful, and then Korra just charges straight in and bumps straight into it. Like I like that contrast of that. Korra's actually like a skilled martial artist, so it's not that she's just like a brute who has no like grace to her at all. But this specific thing where you're just trying to emphasize, just like going with the flow, she can't quite latch onto that approach, because Tenzin, like he often tends to go for with his training, as we see in like book 3 as well, goes for more of the philosophical approach, like introducing the philosophy of the element first, rather than like the practical elements of techniques and so on. So again, it's him. This is how I want to train her, not how Korra like needs to be trained. But what were your thoughts on how the Korra Tenzin training went?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I don't know, I guess for Tenzin, this is sort of like his first time really having to deal with a personality type, in terms of his training of an airbender that's really like far from what his currently is, because with his kids, obviously, raising them to some degree, he probably has like an innate sense on how to deal with them, just from raising them. So even if maybe Milo is like a little bit more on the crazy side of things, he can sort of work around that in terms of how to teach him how to airbend, besides any of the already sort of like innate airbending characteristics that they already have, which they probably had that from maybe the get-go, but with Korra not having any of that, that approach doesn't necessarily work in terms of her personality and how she's going about things. So yeah, like you're saying, like just the idea of teaching the philosophy and the theory, which even today, that's a lot of times how people will go about teaching things, but we've learned that that's not always the best way to go about it, and especially with Korra, that doesn't really work with her at all. But that's something that them as sort of a group, as a master and a student, have to learn about that sort of dynamic, which of course is what happens throughout the whole episode.
And then the other thing, like, because this episode is basically focused on the idea of sort of the correct approach to training. It's like the best way to like learn a skill in a way, and the contrast between sort of Tenzin's traditional airbending training and then pro bending, which Korra views as being like the most modern form of fighting, which she needs to learn about. So some cool stuff here as we like find out just that she's interested in it. She reads it in the paper. She wants to listen to it on the radio. But Tenzin doesn't like pro bending. He doesn't view it as being proper bending in a way, because he obviously is a little bit more traditional. Obviously after this episode they don't really linger on this point that much, but it just kind of shows that Tenzin is a little close-minded when it comes to like how he views pro bending. So I like that, again, difference between the two, that Korra just finds it to be like the coolest thing in the world, whereas Tenzin has no interest in it. So she eventually gets out to see pro bending, where we meet Mako and Bolin. But let's just talk about, I suppose, pro bending in general overall, because it tends to be one of the things that gets discussed a lot in book one, because some people think it takes up too much time in the book. But I think it's a really cool like addition to the world, that you introduce like a sport around the cool magic system in Avatar bending. And I don't think it takes up too much of the plot, because I actually like how it incorporates in. Even 105, which I think is probably most people's weakest episode from the book, is still kind of well written in terms of how it uses the matches. And it's still some good action. It's just a different style. And I like when we get to that scene of like Bolin basically beginning to teach her the pro bending style, that she does it first, and she has the super wide earth bending stance that like no one would knock her over, and he's like, that was nice. Like he notices that like that is really good technique, good power as well, but in a pro bending match you would be like obliterated, because you'd just be targeted because you're just locked in place. So by definition, this sport requires a different approach for, I'd say, like especially an element like Earth. And he just teaches her to be, you have to be light on your feet, but he still has the whole idea of wait until you want to strike, then plant and powerfully strike. And it's just like a slightly different approach. And even throughout the action scenes, you see that, like, yes, it is not as maybe stylish as like a lot of the traditional bending action that we see, because a lot of the attacks that the characters are throwing at each other are kind of the same. There's no like unique attacks necessarily, because it's just earthbenders throw the earth discs, firebenders throw balls of fire that are like this big, waterbenders throw, streams of water that are this big. There's not too much room for the uniqueness of the bending itself. But you see with, say, like Mako, like his crazy, flips that he can do, how agile he is, the sort of fire boxing is like a cool style, that this is useful in close range combat, where you can't just take a stance and do the most powerful moves in the world. And it ends up being quite important in that pro bending is kind of the counter for equalists in a way. Equalists take advantage of like you not being as movable, doing your big attacks by like chi blocking you and hitting you with the kind of bolo things. The pro bending helps. So I've always liked that dynamic over the course of the book, that she learns pro bending right as she needs it, basically. But what are your thoughts on pro bending, both, I suppose the sport itself, but also just like how it sort of alters the way sort of we see the elements over the course of like, especially sort of Korra's style and so on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very reflective of, the current time period that Korra is being placed in terms of just sort of the modernization of the world and technology overall. And, in this case, the modernization of bending, and how that sort of, changes how you use your element in the world. And there are still definitely places, even in this modern world here, where there is a case for using the more sort of traditional ways of using the elements, and you can see more of that as the show goes on, especially when they're out in different environments. Like some of those come more back into play, but especially like you mentioned, sort of the counterpoint to the Equalists and their agility that they have. If they were, if Korra was using sort of her traditional sort of bending techniques, they would probably be captured really early on, and the show would take a very different turn if that was the case here. So it definitely serves its purpose in terms of acclimating her in another way to this new world that she's having to deal with here. And she definitely can take elements of the old world into this sort of bending arena, as we see by the end of the episode with her M bending techniques that she eventually does learn. But it's something that is definitely key to this world. And the overall idea of pro bending, I mean, I don't know, I think it's used in season 1, and the arena's used a little bit later on. But other than that, and the fact that it has like a history for the brothers, it's not really a huge part of the overall thing. I mean, later on, like the arena's too destroyed to even be used in that regard. So I don't know. I mean, for season 1, it's used in a good amount of places, and to me personally, it never seemed too much, but I also do like, sort of the bending sport aspect of, Korra overall. So maybe that's just sort of my personal preference there. But for me, it never really bothered me too much. And, it serves, a point later on in terms of, working with or working against the other teams, and, eventually leading to how it actually works with Amon and the whole plot overall, and just in terms of, the popularity of the sport in Republic City, and how that works towards sort of pushing forward the bending agenda, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, like that is the importance of it. Like it's not just here to have this random thing, that it plays a role in terms of like with Amon. Like he takes out the winners and points out that you let the winners cheat their way to victory, yet all of you like love pro bending and like view these people as like heroes. Watch me destroy like the best of the best benders, and destroy the arena where all this takes place in. Like, what a show of power. That's a huge kind of moment. But I like pro bending. I think it's cool the way like the rules work with the zones, the advancement, the fact that they have the limitations to make it more of a sport, to keep it in check, that like in a way it doesn't really matter how powerful of a bender you are here, because it's more about sort of like agility, stamina more than anything. And obviously power is maybe part of that overall, but like certain characters might not actually be suited to pro bending, even though they're like really 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 strong, and just because of like how limiting it is. Like earthbending is a rather defensive element overall, but the best you can do is like block yourself with like a couple of those discs, but they have holes in them and stuff like that, and you're not allowed to manipulate them too much according to the rules. So there's a cool aspect to it there, in that like Mako is one of the best pro benders, and we'd also view him as being one of the top firebenders that we see, because like he knows lightning, redirection, and generation. And he's like just as powerful out of the ring as he is in the ring. So it kind of highlights that, don't look down on the characters just because they kind of use a pro bending style, because when they incorporate the traditional stuff in as well, it can be very very useful. So that is really really cool to see. I do like as well, like in the episode, like how they go about explaining the rules, because the first match that Korra watches just sort of happens, and you're like, okay, seems cool, it's knock people off the back, but you don't really know what the rules are. But then Korra subs in, she makes mistakes, we find out what all the penalties are for. Then we get to like the final, and we find out like, oh, here's the ways, like the kind of cheating penalties and what they are. And you gradually basically have the whole rule book, and you know exactly what the sport is, how it works after like kind of 3 episodes with any sort of focus on pro bending. In that, I think the only time outside of like book one that we learn a rule of pro bending is randomly in Night of a Thousand Stars, where like Shinobi's like, Bolin's bending 2 stacks of Earth discs. Normally you can't do that, which is kind of interesting in that like the rule book for pro bending actually says for earth bending, earthbenders are allowed to bend multiple discs at one time, but apparently you're not allowed to bend like entire stacks of discs. So there must be another rule that we don't know about that is like that specifies that like you maybe can't like sandwich discs together, because it probably would make them too heavy and cause injuries. But you can like say use 4 of them like hovering in front of you, as long as you like ultimately use them separately. I'm guessing that's sort of the intent based on like the rules around like streaming for like the other elements. So it's kind of cool, and like I think it's really like easy to kind of understand what the rules are. But what are your thoughts on like the fact that there is like a full rule book for this, and like it's fully fleshed out pretty much, like there's in the video game, like there's a whole pro bending mode and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think, that fact that they have rules to this bending, for the bit that we do see it, since it's not in like the whole show, is really the main focus is season 1, and even then it's not even the whole book 1 here. I think that really helps to flesh out, how it works in this world. Like any bit of, rules or understanding that you can have, you can understand just sort of how things have developed in order to get to the point where they have, such structured rules. Like, even like the trading book or the tabletop role playing game that came out, like there's like, 100 plus pages of rules in that for how that actually works, and that just sort of helps inform how things actually work, and you can get ideas of the culture and news and history and stuff from that. So the fact that we have that for this part of the show, which is not the hugest part of the whole overall show, I think it really helps just make it a little bit more interesting, and it just helps play things out. And yeah, it works perfectly well in like the video game as well, for anyone who's played that. Some people have made their own versions of pro bending, either through their own video game versions or their own sort of like online digital versions of the game. So like, even if it's not like a huge thing, people are definitely drawn to that aspect of it, of how it works in the world and how, bending can be used in it. I'm sure there are other games that are similar to this, that, you could play, but the fact that it has bending in it makes it, a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, like I often find myself just kind of feeling like I want more pro bending stuff in stories. Like obviously there's other stuff that I kind of want first from like Korra content, but like I'd be completely up for like a separate like side story that focuses on like just what's going on in pro bending at the moment, in terms of like we haven't come back to it in like basically 2 full seasons. Like the last week off from this is the video game, and like the kind of charity pro bending tournament that the Fire Ferrets win. Other than that, like it's just the start of book 2, the Fire Ferrets aren't together anymore, Bolin has a different team, that doesn't work, and we just sort of move on. Like who are the current champions? Who's the current top team? Is like Tano back to playing again, but fairly now? With the Wolfbats, what are the other key teams? Does the sport change at all now that airbenders are more prevalent? Is it even fair to include airbending because it's sort of all about sort of knockback and a pushback? I'd love to see stuff surrounding that, because like I think we've always joked about give us our pro bending sports anime, but actually I wouldn't mind that, sort of seeing that, having a little bit of a plot about like maybe betting corruption in the background and stuff like that, kind of like we get in Republic City Hustle with Toza, who we do meet in this episode. And it's interesting to note that like, oh, he's a legendary pro bending player from like, he like started when they didn't use safety equipment, I think, is part of the kind of like backstory of it. So that's kind of why he has so many like injuries that he's dealing with in that story. That's just cool that he's a pro bending champion, and so he's training the Fire Ferrets, and that all comes together quite nicely. I'd love to know more about the history, like say the the RPG book when they do the pro bending, the Republic City one. I hope there's a big section on pro bending that maybe goes into the history, and I think it'd be cool if they gave us like who all the champions are, like, because do we have that much of a sense for like how old the sport is? Obviously, it's within like Toza's career pretty
Nah.
much, because like he's back in the days when they didn't use protective equipment or helmets or whatever. So like
Yeah.
there's probably only maybe like 20, 25 years of history of the sport, and I think you could absolutely flesh that out quite nicely. But what are your hopes for like if they ever come back to pro bending? What do you think the best way to use that is? Just do like a complete side story, or do you reunite the fire ferrets again for something, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I think it would be funny if they did reunite the Fire Ferrets. I mean, I think if they did anything with like, the original trio of the Fire Ferrets, it would have to be, like you were saying before, like some sort of like charity event thing where they just have them there just for like an exhibition match because, like it would be pretty, I guess sort of like unfair with like their experience, depending on who they're playing in, of course, to have like sort of like a real tournament match. But in terms of it being used overall, I think it would be, just another part of the city that you could integrate into whatever story that you're trying to tell. Since it seems to be, or at least it was at one point, a really big part of, the city and the entertainment and, sort of the nightlife thing. I mean, just the fact that they have this whole, arena set up, just shows, at least at one point, how important it was towards the city. Now, how that works eventually later on with everything with the Mon, maybe it's sort of like tainted things a bit. But it could also be, as we've seen before, it could be used many other ways as well. So I think there's definitely something to be used there in terms of it just being used in sort of the Avatar world in general, or it could turn into some other, type of, sport that does do a better inclusion of airbenders now that that is more of a prevalent thing in the world. That could be something that, puts them more into, focus or just more, I guess, sort of integration with, the world at large since, airbending hasn't really been around in any sort of huge capacity. It could be used, along those lines, just as a way of, showing how it works to people or how, it interacts with the world at large, since I'm guessing a lot of people don't have a good understanding of how airbending works from, the previous, four benders that only existed in the world.
Um, this episode's pretty to the point, so I think we'll just go into Mako and Bolin next. So they're introduced here. Um, it's a pretty simple introduction in the sense that like you just get the idea that the brothers are kind of like quite different characters. Bolin's more of the kind of like friendly, jokey one. Mako's more sort of like brooding and serious. But they both sort of like even out once they get to know Korra a little bit more over the course of the episode. As we sort of find out that Mako is not overall like as bad as he's maybe presented in his like first couple of scenes here. He's obviously a little bit tired of like, I guess Bolin does bring kind of like some not great people around, and he frustrates him. But no, he actually found the Avatar this time. So fun moments here. I've always loved that scene where Korra reveals slowly to Bolin that she's the Avatar, and he's just like, what? I'm very confused. And Mako figures it out in the background. That's always been a very, very fun scene. Um, Other than that, like it's just like I mentioned earlier on, like you get the quick Bolin training Korra scene for a little bit. You get them ultimately realizing, oh well, we've got to use Korra, otherwise we're out of the tournament, because Hasuk obviously yeah, doesn't turn up. Obviously blame everything on him. He's such a memorable character, Hasuk. Um, he came back. What was it? The band at, was that the wedding? Was it, or am I misremembering that? Hasuk.
It's the
Yeah, yes,
wedding,
he
yeah.
was there. So yeah, they did bring him back, which was quite fun. Um, but yeah, what are your thoughts on this intro to Mako and Bolin?
Yeah, I mean, just seeing them from the beginning, I guess initially we hear them through the radio, right? Because they're sort of in the match and they're hopefully about to win, but Tenzin pulls out the cord, of course. But yeah, then we actually get to see them and we get a pretty good idea, at least initially, on their personalities, and we can see that they're definitely both not perfect and that they have a little bit of a growth to be had, which you can see a little bit of that over this episode, but there's a lot more to them later on that we fully grasp and understand. So I like that we sort of just see sort of the initial sort of highlights of their personalities and sort of how they view themselves as pro benders.
And again, it's interesting to sort of reflect on where we end up with these characters, and that like by the end of the series, like Mako, Bolin are like top 10 firebender, top 10 earthbender for sure. Like Mako is like super talented. Bolin's a lava bender by the end, and just like, yeah, these are really impressive, and that's very consistent with Mako's presentation, especially. Like he's really presented in this episode as being very talented. Like his solo hat trick in the first match that we see, and he's often the last one to be sort of eliminated in the times when they do get eliminated. Just that's really good. And then Bolin, obviously skilled, but they don't lean towards him being like maybe as skilled as his brother, but ultimately we find out that he is super talented as well. So that's obviously a cool thing, just the consistency of like, yeah, we've got 3 very powerful benders on this team, and it works very nicely. But yeah, they don't tell you everything about Mako Bolin here. Like we don't quite get into the sort of like how protective like Mako is of Bolin and how much of a role he played in like getting their lives on track and like keeping Bolin safe during everything that's happened, because we haven't found out like what happened to their parents yet. There's maybe a slight sense of like, it's interesting that they live in the attic of the pro bending arena, but you don't know yet if that's like an odd thing or not as such, but you're maybe a little bit like, okay, that's quite nice. But Mako's sort of standoffishness is more, I guess, him just being protective of both of them. But you immediately see that begin to sort of cool off a little bit towards the end, when he realizes that, oh, there's more to Korra. So that's quite good. Was another quick thing on pro bending. I think Shiro Shinobi in the commentary really helps to make that very exciting. The voice acting, I think, is fantastic there, with the turns of phrases, and Mako's got moxie and stuff like that. It's very good. His basically every line of dialogue from Shiro Shinobi is great. Do you have any thoughts on the commentary?
Yeah, no, I think, like you said, that the whole idea of that playing into the idea of this being a really sort of popular sport, like just hearing that from the radio, you can hear how, I guess, sort of enthusiastic, this sport is to Republic City at this time and place. The idea that, the White Lotus guards are really into it. They're really, hanging on every word that, Shiro Shinobi's saying. And then when you actually get, to actually see the matches, how, that plays into just sort of describing and adding to the action that's going on. Basically, sort of like a narrator of sorts, but just for, sort of the pro bending match while it's actually happening here. So, it definitely adds another level of commentary. It's like, being able to sort of like dump a bunch of information on you without like, so far as like, you're getting told it, like, you're getting told the information, but it's not like in a way that's just sort of like, just for the sake of telling you. So it's a nice integration into the story overall to make it a little bit more interesting. And, it's something that happens in real sports. So, something that, from an outsider's perspective, you can kind of understand where it's coming from, even if you're not, the biggest sports person yourself.
And then I guess the final sequence of the episode is basically Korra is revealed in the middle of the match to be the Avatar. Tenzin finds out, and we basically get the conversation between Korra and Tenzin, and then in the match right at the end, Korra has her big sort of discovery. She finally sort of connects with the right way to like integrate the airbending training into actual combat, and this all works quite nicely. I like the reveal that she's the Avatar in the middle of the match, because even the referee gets confused and he's like, penalty, I think, because obviously I guess that means Aang never played pro bending, otherwise there probably would be that rule in place. But obviously it's a very specific. There's only one person that this rule can ever apply to, so it is very funny that like they just have to on the spot be like, well, I guess we have to let her play. Just only bend the one element. Okay. So that's a kind of fun one. And I like how the opposing team is sort of like, I can't believe this. Why are you letting her continue? Just because she's the Avatar. But you know, it's a cool thing. She gets knocked off, and in between sort of rounds, the scene with Tenzin's interesting because it's obviously like a continuation of their argument from before, but it comes out in a pretty interesting way where she says like, no, this is what I need to learn, modern styles of fighting. And then Tenzin says, being the Avatar isn't all about fighting, Korra. When will you learn that? But after this, Korra leaves, so Tenzin doesn't. There's no continuation of this necessarily. Then in the middle of the match, she discovers, you know, the kind of be the leaf style. But we never really come back to the fact that, yes, Tenzin was maybe wrong to just completely ignore pro bending as being valuable, but Korra does actually need to learn that being the Avatar isn't all about fighting. So I like that in that scene, there's kind of problems on both sides. That even though the episode ultimately sort of commits to the idea that Korra was more correct to pursue pro bending to help her, Tenzin isn't wrong with the criticism of Korra here either. So I do like that. And that Korra's been struggling with the dodging in the fight, and then right on the edge, she sort of connects with it. That, oh, you know, flowing motions, like dodging by like spinning, always staying in motion. That's the core of like airbending movement, and that dodging tires out the opposing team, and the Fire Ferrets have their comeback. It's a really cool moment because they put the music track on, the kind of Be the Leaf music track, and it's a really strong scene because they commit to showing the fancy animation of the movement and so on. It's a really good scene. I like the way it works, and that Tenzin actually gets into the match seeing this and is actually happy that they won. So cool, but I like that there's this underlying thing of like, okay, Korra has made some progress by pro bending to help her airbending, but we haven't addressed the fact that she seems to be focused completely on fighting. Now, I suppose this more or less gets resolved, I'd say, kind of 104, the aftermath of 104, and her being like defeated by Amon and kind of changing up her approach kind of is kind of what deals with this, but it's nice that it's there. But what are your thoughts on the sort of conclusion of the Korra Tenzin conflict in the episode?
Yeah, I mean, I like that it seems like they're able to come to some point of just recognition of, you know, there's maybe multiple ways or different ways about doing things, and you know they can see the faults in their ways by the end of the episode. Not that it means that everything is sort of perfect, like you mentioned. Like there still is a lot more that Korra needs to learn, and this definitely isn't the end all, the be all, which, you know, later on we eventually see where this does actually come into conflict with some other things that she actually needs to do. But at least, you know, it gives you a nice sort of way of closing out this episode on sort of a positive note, just in terms of, you know, just, you know, not everything's perfect in the city, not everything's perfect with Korra and her training. Like she still hasn't bent any air yet, and we don't see that until quite a bit later on. But you know, we can see that some of the ideas and the concepts are, you know, becoming, you know, sort of more recognized in her mindset here, which, you know, this is essentially what, you know, Mako did earlier on as well, sort of just waiting, you know, for the opponents to sort of tire themselves out. But, you know, it's one of those things that I guess, you know, you really have to sort of experience for yourself and not see or hear about, which is cool to see that, you know, Korra was able to actually grasp that actual concept.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's an interesting one because like I feel like that is most of the episode. Like there are other scenes, but for the most part, like I think that is the majority of what this episode focuses on. Like there's a lot more with Mako and Bolin that comes out later. More pro bending stuff happens when we get into the like more like interesting stages of the competition, and we get more of the sort of behind the scenes stuff happening, where, like they need to get the money and so on. Um, but is there any other kind of topics from this episode that you have?
Let me see. No, we talked about that and training. No, I think that's it for the most part. No, I think it's really, a good one, just how they set things up and how, I don't know, they have things flow from part to part. I mean, I don't know, the other part that I like is how when Korra does eventually get them to actually sort of like do the match after Hook doesn't come up as a no good no show. I think that's like a nice little bit that they have there. So I think the little character interactions or the start of those work pretty well in this episode.
Yeah, and there's a few like kind of fun moments where like Pema has to come over and help Tenzin get over how like stressed he is about Korra, and then he's like to like Jinora and the kids, I hope you're not like this when you're teenagers, and then Jinora's like, I'll make no such promises. And it's maybe a little bit of a like teaser ahead of some of the book 3 stuff where like Kai helps her to be like to kind of speak out a little bit more and like disagree with her father. It's not maybe to the extremes that they're maybe talking about here, but it's a fun, maybe slightly foreshadowing moment that like she has to like be a little bit more rebellious to sort of like get Tenzin to kind of treat her at the level that she's at. Because as we saw here, like she was the one who did the air gates properly, and then like gets the gates spinning again. So highlighting that she knows exactly what she's doing already. That was cool. Milo had a fun kind of crazy moment where like Korra blew up, and then Milo sort of had his little bit of a tantrum just to kind of copy Korra, just highlighting how crazy he is. And then the girls just hug Tenzin, and not like he's crazy, like then he just walks off. There's a lot of like fun little moments like that over the course of the episode as well. Like Korra and Bolin's first interaction, that they actually get on like straight away and have like a kind of banter with each other straight away. That Bolin comes up with this kind of idea that like, oh, he's already invited her here, like she's with me, and then like the whole we're together. No, you think that, don't you? and so on. That's quite fun. And I like that it also like there's a slight tease of some of the shipping stuff that eventually happens. That like Korra and Bolin are getting on very well, but you can maybe tell that Korra is kind of more interested in Mako. They obviously do the sort of like glance across the kind of bay type thing, but it's sort of there. And this obviously becomes a lot of people's biggest criticism with book 1 is the shipping stuff, and that it's maybe a little bit drama focused. I don't think it's really come into play just yet, but if we do continue with the reviews, it will be interesting to see how we feel about it all these years on. But I suppose just as a final point, yeah, do you have any thoughts on the like? Do you see any early stages of the shipping stuff in this episode?
I mean, I could see why other people would see it. I mean, I think the whole looking over the bay, that's one that you can think of. The whole sort of, who's with who, you can understand, that could be a thing there. I mean, I think in these 2 episodes, I think it's a bit too early to really sort of, put a lot of stock into that unless you really want to, which, I mean, we know how it ends up. So, who knows what they were trying to hint in the beginning here in terms of, the actual end relationships. But, I don't think, at least in this beginning on the part, it's not like anything that should be like in your way of like enjoying the episode or anything like that.
So there's our review for the first 2 episodes of Korra. That's roughly the style that we're probably going to do them in if we continue. So like I said earlier on, if you're interested in us doing, like continuing the Korra and bringing Avatar into it as well, with the idea that most of these episodes would be one Avatar, one Korra episode, definitely let us know, because like we don't want to do it if you guys aren't interested in it. But we think it would be a decent idea to do it. So if we do go ahead, the next episode of the podcast will be us reviewing the first 2 episodes of Avatar, so 101, 102. Then we do the half Korra, half Avatar ones. So that's just a bit of a unique way to do it because I suppose on the podcast we have a little bit of a history of doing our rewatches in sort of unique ways. Because the last time I think we did it, we did random rewatches where like we just kind of spin the wheel a little bit, or I think in some cases it'd be like, okay, you have to choose a book 1 episode. Which of the ones left do you want to do? So just kind of doing it that way, but this would be sort of in sequence, but both series side by side, which is kind of a cool way to do it. Because like Korra's seasons are shorter, we're going to get some weird situations where like we're reviewing a Korra finale alongside like the Great Divide. And it's just going to be like this massive like contrast of like we have like 10 talking points about the Korra episode, but like 2 about that episode, and so on, and kind of the reverse as well. That by the time we get to like an ATLA finale, we're talking about this like middle of book 2 episode or something like that, like the Sting maybe or something. So there could be some fun dynamics as we go through it. So definitely in terms of feedback for this episode, let us know your thoughts on more review style stuff. But yeah, that has been it. Obviously, depending on feedback, the next podcast might be, a bit sooner than you'd maybe expect. Otherwise, at the very least, we will have a podcast the weekend after the Free Comic Book Day book comes out. Assuming we're able to organize that in time, because it's a Saturday, I think Free Comic Book Day is always. So depending on how available the book is, because they obviously have that weird thing where they wait like a week or 2 before they put it up digitally for free. So a lot of the times we're relying on like someone posting scans of it, because there can be weird licensing stuff of like they didn't get enough of this comic in or whatever. But it hasn't been too bad the last few times, but it could be tricky. So it might be the weekend after it, the day after the event, it might be the week after. We'll get to it at the very least. So that has been episode 240 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.